Hello, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me as we've just started the meeting. I'd like to welcome you all to our webinar this afternoon on job descriptions and whether your job descriptions are fit for purpose in this year 2024. Joining me today on the webinar is my colleague Dan Marlow. So I'll let Dan introduce himself in a few moments. But before we start, just a little bit of housekeeping. So you do have the option to turn your cameras on if you're not feeling shy. If you'd rather keep your camera off so you can eat your lunch, that's absolutely fine. Microphones are all muted, but if we do get a chance at the end to do any sort of Q&A, we will enable the microphones and then people can raise their hand in the usual way on a Teams meeting. And yeah, you can feel free to fire your questions. So I'm going to just briefly shut up for a moment and let Dan introduce himself.
Hi everyone, I'm Dan. I'm the recruitment team manager here for Plus One. Just want to say thank you for everyone for joining us. And if I'm going to be looking after the chat today. So if you have any questions throughout the webinar today, feel free to put them into the chat box there. And if we have a few minutes left at the end, we are going to try and do a quick 5-minute Q&A about any of the topics raised. So if you have anything, like Stuart said, you can either put your hand up as a raised or put the comment in the chat box, and I will be manning that throughout.
Perfect, thanks Dan. Just before we start, I'd just like to let everybody know that we are recording this webinar, and after the webinar is finished, later on this afternoon, we'll be sending an email out to everybody who attended with a very short survey, literally take you a minute, just so we can make sure that we're providing content that everybody finds interesting. Please feel free to give us your honest feedback, that would be really helpful. But also, as a thanks for filling in that very short survey, we'll also provide everybody with a template which you can use or your line managers can use to create your own job descriptions. So hopefully that will be of some help. So let's crack on because half an hour goes really quickly. So let's talk about job descriptions and whether they are fit for purpose. So here are some of the areas that we're going to cover in the webinar. Really, so what information should be in a job description? Is your job description actually fit for purpose? And any potential legal pitfalls that you might want to look out for? And how can a job description actually help with employee satisfaction? Actually, with regards to everybody here, we're really pleased to see such a wealth of human resource knowledge in the room. It'd be great to get your feedback and thoughts throughout the meeting. So if you do have any comments or if there's anything you'd like to say or would like to add, again, please pop it in the chat and we'll try and get round to some of those before we finish. If there's anything we can't answer in the chat, then of course we can contact you offline afterwards. That's absolutely fine. So just very briefly to start with, what should a job description actually do? Again, bear in mind this presentation has been put together for all levels of experience within the room. So again, as we've said, it should create some clarity for the employer and the employee. By doing that, you're empowering your employees and providing some clarity on their responsibilities. And it also therefore helps in performance reviews. Should be very transparent and easy to measure performance. Of course, it should list all of the tasks involved in the job and some measurements and accountabilities. And we'll come on to accountabilities a little bit later. Just before we go any further, I just would like to sort of explain why we're doing this. We, of course, as recruiters, get to see a lot of job descriptions, you know, of varying degrees of detail and quality. But one thing we do get in terms of feedback, especially from people who we speak to who are sort of looking to leave jobs or looking to leave their employer, is these sort of grey areas where perhaps, and certainly over the last few years, organisations have changed, things have happened, new systems have been brought in, maybe changes in process. So the actual job they're doing doesn't bear a huge amount of resemblance to what's in their job description. My wife's a perfect example of this. She's been with her organization for about 10 years now. And this is a global organization, you know, huge matrix-based business, multi-billion American corporation. And if you show her her job description, it actually looks nothing like what she does, which, you know, she kind of has lived with it for a while, but it does make it very, very, very difficult when it comes to her doing her appraisal. Because of course she's not sure where to benchmark herself. Is it against the job description? Is it against what her manager's telling her to do? And yeah, it does cause her especially quite a lot of stress and anxiety, especially when appraisals come up. So again, because of all this feedback, this is why we thought this might be a good time to bring up this topic. So just continuing on, of course, a job description is an opportunity, certainly when you're recruiting, to showcase your business and why you might be a great company to work for. So you could include elements of your company's mission statement, any core values, any other, perhaps your ED&I policies to, you know, publicize that you're an inclusive organization. All of these are well known to help attract and hopefully maintain and keep hold of high value candidates. So as I mentioned earlier, some common problems that certainly we see with job descriptions and the feedback we get from candidates is these are of course created at a moment in time in a company's history. So then they must be updated regularly because organizations change, whether they shrink, whether they grow. As I mentioned, new processes come in. But equally, and you may have one or two of these people in your organization, we usually call them the sort of unicorns. People can outgrow their jobs, or it might be that, you know, someone's doing a great job in their role, but because they're typically a very reliable member of staff, they get extra duties added in, and those extra duties start to become embedded. And sooner or later, they no longer fit within their job description. And conversely, the opposite is true as well. You know, some job descriptions just don't resemble the jobs anymore because the processes and companies have developed over a period of time. So you'll hear me talk about this or use this term, but I've always been shown and trained, and I do believe in calling job descriptions or describing job descriptions like picture frames. Okay, so ideally you create the picture frame and then you find the person to fit within the picture frame. Then you've got nice comfortable sides and nothing's, you know, sticking out where it shouldn't be. So really this would be an ideal sort of basic company structure. So everybody sat within their frames, everybody knows who they're reporting to, everybody knows where their accountabilities lay, and etc., etc. Okay. Now, again, as I said earlier, this works for a while, but then, of course, as businesses change or develop, things start to look a little bit like this. You know, and some of you might recognize these in your own jobs. You know, so for example, you may be a finance team manager, but because you happen to have a HR qualification, you may end up wearing HR hat within your business. And all of a sudden that just becomes your job. Even though it's not in your job description and it's not technically something that you're appraised upon, it can create this kind of level of confusion. And like I said, you know, nice to have some neat rectangular picture frames, but as I've shown on the diagram here, you get these people who we call unicorns who don't fit into a picture frame. You know, they've sort of bent the frame all out of position as they've grown within the job, and that's fine, but how do you replace a unicorn? Clues in the clues in the statement. So it can make then recruiting for those positions very, very difficult because you've built the role around the person as opposed to putting the person into the role or into the frame. So if you recognize this, it's probably good reason to be on this webinar. So just a couple of basics then. So what should be included in a job description? Well, of course, basics like the job title, summary of the role, key tasks and responsibilities, accountabilities, as I mentioned earlier, we'll come on to shortly, because it's not often a term that you see in a job description. Qualifications, experience, of course, and perhaps some general information about comps and bends. Like I said earlier, we've got a great amount of knowledge in the room. So if anybody does have any other suggestions as to perhaps what they put into their job descriptions, I'm sure everyone in the room would love to hear. So please pop it in the chat if you've got any further thoughts and suggestions. So a bit of planning. And of course, I'm speaking to a room of HR professionals. So I'm sure you have this when you do your job descriptions, you may be doing this already. But really, going back to my picture frame analogy, when you're planning your job descriptions, it's really important to engage all of your leadership team, your management team, but also the people actually doing the job, to really sort of conduct what we call a role analysis to ascertain what it is they actually do in their role. So in other words, if they disappeared tomorrow, how would we replace them? What do they actually do, and how does that fit into the company and the organization? Understand the purpose, but also, and I mentioned accountabilities a couple of times, what is really important is to understand where one role stops and another role starts. This can often get very blurred. Is Joe meant to be doing this, or is John meant to be doing that, or is that the role of the sales department? Or actually it falls under marketing. And again, we get all these kind of wobbly picture frames where people aren't quite sure where their accountabilities lay. And again, this crops up a lot when it comes to appraisals. Obviously, do the roles align with the business objectives, and who is responsible for what, basically. So I'm going to give some examples now in terms of a basic structure and a sort of a workflow, and how we would cut accountabilities off and create handover parts. So for example, we've got a salesperson. Their job is to win new business and to get customers to sign a contract. And therefore, when we're writing the job description, we kind of need to understand what they're looking after, what their accountabilities are, and what everybody else has to do who are helping within those departments. So we've got 3 roles within this organization, so hypothetical structure. So job A is the BDM, and as I said, they're responsible for winning new clients and for getting the clients to sign a contract. We've also got a sales aftercare department. Now their role is to deal with the administration, so perhaps to write the contracts, but also onboard the new customer, make sure everything's put into the database and make sure all the contact information is correct. And they then hand over to a customer service team once the new customer's been onboarded. And they're then responsible for any ongoing needs or requirements or complaints. And this is how this might look as a workflow. So as you can see, we've got our business developer there on the left. He's winning new business, or she's winning new business. They sign the contract, and that is their role done. So they're handing over the accountability at that point to sales support, job B. They're onboarding the customers, producing the contracts, ensuring the data is captured, processing the first order and organizing the first delivery. After which, they're handing over the accountability to customer care team, and they're responsible for all of the items you can see below. So as you can see in green here, we've highlighted the handover of accountabilities, and this is where it's important then to have this ideally defined in the job description. And how we do this is when you're doing your role analysis, you would really kind of measure the average performance of somebody either who's doing the role, or perhaps a group of people or a team who've been doing that role over perhaps a 3-year time scale. And it's really important to really important to measure the average performance You may have an absolute superstar in your sales team who smashes their targets every year, wins the annual Employee of the Year award. But those people aren't, if that person left, it'd be difficult to find an absolute like for like. So what we're looking for is the average across the team. So in the salesperson's example, we're looking at how many meetings the team average per month, how many meetings we require to actually hit the target, and then we can produce our KPIs and our job description around that. And this might look something like this. So let's say, again, we're going to just use this salesperson example. So let's say their target is £1 million a year in new business sales, and they have to win, I don't know, that each contract is worth between 50 and 100,000. So basic maths, they have to really fill about 20 contracts per annum to at least hit this target and hopefully go over. Your average performer over the last 3 years closes 1 in 3 quotes. So 1 in 3 quotes lead to a signed contract. That means your average salesperson must generate 60 quotes a year or 5 quotes per month to enable this to happen. Each quote takes 3 meetings to generate. These are prospect meetings with future clients. So in other words, their KPI or a performance measurement might be that they have to generate 15 prospect customer meetings every month. And you can see how that works up to the 1 million a year in new business sales, because based upon what's been going on in the department over the last few years, as long as they're booking 15 prospect customer meetings a month, they should be generating 5 quotes a month. And therefore, if they're closing 1 in 3, they should be smashing their target. And then if everybody in your team is doing that, and that's how they're measured, things should, unless there's a huge economic crash or another pandemic, things should just happen. Things should just build, and it becomes a little bit more predictable because of that. Hopefully that makes sense, but if you're not sure, just pop it in the chat and we can come back to it. At the bottom there, just below that, you've got the other key metric, and that's actually signing up the customers to a contract. Those are the main things we want this person to do. But there's a couple of other little drivers, such as logging calls on the CRM and making sure that the information is correct, that we also would like this person to be doing. They're not as mission critical, but we want to put them in the job description regardless. So these start to become what we call measurables, because they're not tasks. These are the things that we're going to highlight during an appraisal. So we'll go back to the accountabilities. These are the things we want you to do. It should be clear, and it should be something that your employee, in this case, the salesperson, can really understand from day one. I know exactly what I'm doing. I know exactly what I'm aiming for, and I know exactly what that's going to mean for the business. So I can say I'm doing my job. As you can see at the bottom, we've added the onboarding meeting with the sales support. So if they're doing their onboarding meeting, they know that they've handed over their accountability to their colleague in the next team. So these bullet points would formulate part of the job description that we would produce for this role. As I said just now, it should be simple. And I use the term black or white because what you don't want is a load of grey and a load of uncertainty. Ideally, your employees should be very clear on what their accountabilities are so they can monitor their own performance. And it helps also to create clarity for your managers when they're coming to do appraisals. Again, especially if you've got junior managers who maybe haven't had a huge amount of experience at running appraisals, it almost becomes a bit of a tick box exercise. So some of the questions that they could ask would be quite simple. Have they created as many quotes against their target? Have they hit their meetings attended? Have they signed up new clients, etc., etc. So in terms of recruitment, and of course, this is where we see most of our job descriptions, what else needs to be in there? Well, would the person require a recognised qualification? For example, is a degree relevant for the position anymore? Perhaps if it's a technical role or maybe engineering, then yes. Maybe if it's more of an administrative role, perhaps not. But again, that's something to measure against your average or top performers. Same with education. What experience would they require? Again, based upon people that have done the role before. And again, that goes for sort of soft skills and technical skills as well. Again, ideally, you're assessing these requirements based upon what's previously worked in the department, not what you think you might need. Now, I appreciate this is a little tricky potentially if it's a brand new position. But again, if it's a brand new role, you'll be assessing the needs of the business and what metrics, therefore, that person would need to hit. So a few other things you could include, and again, please pop your thoughts in the chat if there's anything else you'd like to add in. If you've got a company mission statement, it's a great place to add it here, especially if you're using the job description for recruitment. If you have core values or any culture statements, please add them in. It's also a great place to put your EDI statement or something that identifies you as an inclusive employer. Certainly with the current generation, I think we're on Gen Z, Gen Alpha now. I lose track. Those sorts of things are becoming more and more important when they make a decision as to who to work for. If you've got a careers page on your website, then perhaps include some hyperlinks. I've seen some absolutely outstanding careers pages on websites before with video testimonials and other information about, you know, company away days and all sorts of things that really kind of emphasize why it's great to work for your business. Nothing wrong with putting that in the job description at all. It all adds a little bit of extra color and flavor to the document. Okay. Again, room full of HR people. I don't want to preach to the converted, but there are, of course, some potential risks. And funnily enough, some things that we still see quite commonplace in job descriptions. So, of course, you should take care not to include any language that might be seen as discriminatory or bias. So, of course, you know, words like dynamic or energetic or things like that. That would also go for your recruitment adverts as well, which often are, you know, lifted, let's say, from the job descriptions. So maybe just sense check the content, especially if it's not written by yourself. Maybe a line manager's written it. But one thing we do see a lot of actually, and I'll be interested to get your views on this, is you'll often see on a job description that someone will need X amount of years experience in a particular role or function. Now, I've always been told, taught, shown, however, that actually putting a specific number of years on a job description, you could fall foul of discrimination around age. So if you think about it, if somebody is, I don't know, leaves university at 22 and your job description says they must have 5 years experience in something, then what you're actually saying is that someone has to be at least 27 before they can apply for that job. So you can see why that might be a potential banana skin for someone. Something that we always do when we're converting job descriptions into adverts, as well as writing some nice copy around why you guys are so great to work for, we would perhaps change that for something a little more vanilla, like just previous experience in whatever it might be. If you think about it, you know, if someone's got 2 years experience in a job, but they are good at it, then why do they need 5? You know, I've met plenty of people who've got 20 years experience in a certain role, but doesn't mean they're any good at it, especially if you have a look at their CVs. Whereas some people, think about sports, you know, especially football, you've got a young 16, 17-year-old who's already playing for the first team. You know, if you're young enough, if you're good enough, you're old enough, is the old adage. So yeah, just be a little bit careful around that, because we still see that quite a lot, even nowadays in job descriptions. Few other things to try and avoid. Try not to make your job descriptions too long. We sometimes get sent job descriptions that are sort of 4, sometimes 5 pages long. It's literally a brain dump onto a piece of paper. And to be honest, sometimes we do get feedback from candidates that find that off-putting or even daunting. So that can sometimes be a negative. So a little bit like a CV, maybe try and keep it to around sort of 2 or 3 pages at the absolute most. Equally, if you're too vague, that can have the opposite effect. And sometimes we see this in terms of jargon and acronyms. We sometimes see this a lot in some of our more sort of corporate clients. There'll be various different acronyms that mean something to internal employees, but mean absolutely nothing to us and the outside world. So again, try and make it a little bit more plain English if you can, so that it will appeal to a wider organization. Sorry, a wider audience. Okay, well, we're approaching the 25-minute mark. So just to summarize, because I appreciate we put quite a lot of content in there in a relatively short space of time. So as I said, we'll enable the link to this video for anyone that wants it, and we can send out copies of the slides as well. But your job descriptions really should do all of the following. So clearly define the purpose of the role, provide information about your business and its mission, obviously a general overview of the job and how it serves the organization, so it's clear. Set out the key responsibilities and accountabilities for the role, again, so you've got those clear divisions between which function does what and who's accountable for what. And yeah, most importantly at the end there, please review these on a reasonably regular basis, or certainly if there's a major organizational change. Okay, well, that is 25 minutes. Thank you very much for listening. We're going to open up to a bit of Q&A if anyone does have any questions. So I am just going to see if I can enable the microphones for everybody. So bear with me a moment. Or actually might be easier if anyone has a question, if they're able to just sort of raise their hand through Teams. I believe I can enable your own microphone. Yes, I can. So does anybody have any questions before we finish up today?
Rachel has asked a question in the chat box.
Oh, great. Do you want to read that out, Dan?
Rachel asked, if we state office-based role, do we have to specify a reason now?
Do we have to specify a reason?
Yes.
Yeah. No, I don't believe you have to specify a reason at all as to why a role is office-based. I appreciate this is quite a difficult subject in some organizations, because some roles will be hybrid or field-based, and other roles will be, 9 to 5 in the office. I think it's good to specify on the job description if a role is office-based. I mean, if anyone asks the question as to why, then it's usually because that's what the department does. So you're not really falling foul of any kind of discrimination, bias or anything like that. I mean, I certainly don't believe you are. Again, if anyone else in the room has any thoughts on that, then please feel free to raise your hand. Okay. Any other questions before we finish up? No? Okay, excellent. Well, thank you very much for attending. I hope you enjoyed it and hope you got something from it. But again, be very interested to get your feedback and thoughts when we send out the survey later on. Like I said, if you'd like copies of the slides, please feel free and let me know, and I'll send those out to you later on. And hopefully we'll see you again for our next webinar in September. Thank you very much all for attending, and have a great rest of your day.